Hi everyone, this is Steve Danik with the Great Northern Way Campus Master of Digital Media program. We're doing some work with the University of British Columbia Department of Fisheries to produce a three-dimensional visualization of scientific data describing fish populations in the Gulf of Mexico. What I'm going to do today is provide you with a quick tutorial so you can download Blender and use it to make your own video game. Today we'll cover modeling a fish and creating a skeleton for that fish, and we might get into texturing the fish and creating game logic for controlling the fish. We want to make a fish. We have a box. To make a fish, we're going to go into vertex editing mode by pressing the tab key, or we could click down here and select. Blender has a unique interface. To select everything, instead of using Control A, you press A. A also unselects everything if something is already selected. So I don't want everything selected, I just want something selected. I'm going to press A to get rid of my selection. And now I'm going to press B to get a band select, and click and drag, and I have selected 4 vertices in my object. I'm going to press the Alt button and orbit around just so you can see what I have there. That I've confirmed that, I'm going back to the front view by function J, or number pad 1. I want to extrude these vertices by pressing E on the keyboard, and I'll extrude a region and just drag the mouse over to the left. I want to scale these vertices by pressing S on the number on the keypad, and I'll scale it down. I'll press A to select nothing. I'll press B to get a band select. I'll press E to extrude a region, and scale that down. Let's extrude that one more time, press E again. And this time I'm going to scale it, but only on the Z axis. So I'll orbit around just so you can see the effect of that. I press S, and I press Z, and I can scale on the Z axis only. Press B to select my top vertices, and B to select my bottom vertices. And I can cut these faces with Shift K, which gives me a knife cut, and I'll do a multi-cut, and I'll choose 2. And I'm just going to click here once, come over to the right, and click again, and then hit enter on the keyboard. And you can see that it produced a multi-cut. B to get a band select, function 1 to go to the front view, E to extrude. So here I'm extruding both the top and the bottom because I selected both sides. So after I complete my extrude, I can just click somewhere, and then I can hit S, Z to scale on the Z axis and get them back, and G, Z to grab on the Z axis. B to select, B to select, and then I can just grab on the X axis with G, X, and make them more fin-like. A to select nothing, B to select, and then scale on the Z axis, and then grab on the X axis. Something like that. Maybe scale that on the Z axis. Maybe like that. Let's just grab all of these. B, B, and scale on the Z axis. That's a little better. Okay, let's orbit around our fish a bit. B to border select, B to border select. I can orbit around this with Alt, and I can scale on the Y axis. Make those a little bit tighter. A to select nothing, B to select that tail, scale that on the Y axis. B to select the nose, and I'll scale that in all directions. Press Tab to go back to our object mode, and we can add a modifier to the object, which is a subsurf modifier, and it smooths out the object. Or another way to do this is add multi-res to the object. Using the Catmull-Clark subdivision algorithm, we'll add a level, and it does pretty much the same thing. Still looks blocky, so let's, in our edit mode, just go set smooth. So I hit space on the keyboard to get my menus, and I add an armature. And I'll just hit G to grab the tip of that armature and bring it. And we want to extrude that armature by pressing E. I forgot to click X-ray down on the edit buttons. And now I can see the armature through the mesh. Keep extruding that bone until I get to the tail. So pressing E on the keyboard gives me an extrusion. Pressing E on the keyboard gives me an extrusion. Pressing E on the keyboard gives me an extrusion. Now, Apple click. Extrude that for the top dorsal fin. I'm going to Apple click on it again, and I'm going to extrude that for the bottom dorsal fin. Tab to go back to object mode. Let's hit A to select nothing. Let's Apple click on our fish to select it. And let's Apple click on our armature to select that as well. And let's hit Control P on the keyboard and make a parent, and we'll make the armature the parent. The armature is going to always lead the mesh. Here, Blender will create vertex groups for us, so we'd like it to do that. So we'll select Create from Closest Bones. See the effect of that by going into Pose mode, selecting some bone, Apple clicking on the mesh, changing that to Weight Paint mode, and now what you see here is a variation in color on the mesh from blue to red. Red meaning this particular bone has perfect influence on the mesh at this location. Switch to multi-res level 1. Okay. Don't forget to check both sides and hit every vertex. And just Apple click on a different bone if you want to select a different bone. In particular, I want to make sure that the tail bone operates the tail and the fin bones operate the fins. Anyways, I think our weight painting is pretty close. We can actually grab bones and rotate them to see the effect of our weight painting. And I hit escape just to quit that action. This one maybe we should give some influence to some of these vertices. I'm going to go down to half weight and half opacity so I can paint just a little bit. And that you can see that gives quite a different color. And orbit around. Do the same thing on the other side. You will note if you're painting vertices in Blender that you can only paint on the vertices and it interpolates the colors between the vertices. And to clean some of these up here, I'm going to make sure the tailbone has no real influence on the fin. So we need to see a timeline. I'm going to split my view by right-clicking Split Area. And in this area I'm going to change the button to a timeline. Select just my armature, go into pose mode, and select all the bones, and press I on the keyboard to insert a keyframe. I don't really care so much about location because the location may be determined by the AI when I get into the game. I don't really care so much about scale because I'm not going to warp the fish too much. I do care about rotation, so I'm going to insert the keyframe for rotation only at frame 1. And I'm going to go to frame 100 and insert the same keyframe, so I on the keyboard, to insert rotation only. Need a neutral keyframe in the middle as well, so around frame 50 let's insert I on the keyboard, rotation. If we go to the middle somewhere, middle of one of these cycles, we can select one of these bones or more. We can rotate them. I'm just going to orbit around a little bit. Rotate and then press Z on the keyboard to rotate it on the Z axis only. And now I can move my mouse around. That's pretty good. Let's grab one more, rotate that on the Z axis. Select the bones you're interested in. So I'm Shift Apple clicking on bones that I want. And I'll press I on the keyboard to insert a keyframe. And I care about rotation. So at frame 25 I've created a new keyframe just for these two bones. And that's a rotation keyframe. And now the fish has part of an animation. Let's go to frame 75 and do the same thing on the other side. RZ to rotate on the Z axis. RZ to rotate on the Z axis. Select those two bones with Apple Shift and then press I on the keyboard to insert a keyframe, and we will insert rotation. And now we can scrub through the time to see what it does. If we wanted, we could just pick a random keyframe and grab some random bone and insert a little bit of character. So just rotate maybe on the y-axis or on the x-axis and insert a keyframe for that bone. We've created a bunch of poses. These poses can be turned into actions in the action editor. If I change one of my panel views to action editor, I can see that I have an action set up. The action was set up automatically. I can see all of the keyframes from the action, and I can change the name of the action to fish flap tail. Now let's go into our game mode. So I'm going to change this panel back to buttons. I'm going to click on the little Pac-Man here, that's our game logic, and I'm going to add some things in. I don't particularly need to be in pose mode here, so I'm going to go back to object mode. The game engine. On the game engine we have sensors, controllers, and actuators. A sensor is a trigger or something happening in the world. It's some sort of event. A controller is some type of logic. And or are the two common controllers, but there are also more complex controllers. And actuators are things that you want to happen in the world, or things that you want the object to do when it responds to some event. So we're going to add an event. The event is going to be always, which is always firing. Always has a pulse rate. Right now it's 0, so it means continuous. I can set it back to 100, which is 100 frames, because I know that my animation is 100 frames. I'm going to add a controller. The controller is AND. It could be OR. If we only have one sensor, the controller doesn't matter. But I do need to link those. So what's happening here? There's a sensor, which is a world event. The sensor is called always. And with a pulse rate of 100 frames, it's going to send a little signal on through this electrical wire to this controller. And the controller says AND, which means all the things on the left-hand side have to be true for me to pass this signal on to the next action. And there's only one thing on the left-hand side, so that's always true. The actuator is the interesting part. We're going to add one, and we're going to select action as our type. And we're going to loop the action. And the action we created was fish flap tail. This is case sensitive, and it has to match the name that we gave the action just a moment ago. I'm going to link up these two, and now I have a complete game logic for this fish. Set the frames. So we're going to start that on frame 1 and end that on frame 100. Now if I press P, we should go into the game mode, and you can see that the fish is flapping its tail. Pretty cool. Escape to get back. Add a bit of motion. So again, an actuator, which is something we want to happen in the world, and we're going to set motion, and we want X to be negative 0.05. And we can call this movement, and we can call this one flap tail. So now if we press P, our fish takes off. Let's do some texture painting. We can select our fish and press F to go into face select mode, and press A to select all, and press U to unwrap. And I like to use smart projections. Everybody's different. Some people like cylindrical projections, some people like planar projections, but I'll just use smart projections for now. I'm going to hit OK here. And then I can go and view my texture. I'm going to split this view, split area, and I'm going to show the UV editor here. So this is a basic orange peel type unwrapping of our skin on the fish. So if the fish were an orange, you would have to get the orange peel off of it, and when you unwrap an orange peel, you could make it flat. Similarly, we have this UV unwrap projection for our fish. First we need to go and make a new image, so image new, 512, 512 and click OK. We have a new image which is turquoise. The important thing is that we can paint on this image by clicking on this little pencil here. And I can go to my view menu and select paint tool, and now I have access to brushes and colors. Like fish texture .jpg. Sorry, let's make that .png. And let's click the present to pack the texture into the Blender file, which means there's no extra file to worry about. We can actually paint our fish in 3 dimensions. Here we're in the 3D view and we go to texture paint. This only works if you've already unwrapped the UV and you've created an image for the UV, so Blender knows where to store the information. It also works with the image paint brushes and tools that are in the UV texture painting. So we can change the color of our brush here, and we can draw right onto the mesh now. I won't get too carried away here, but you can really go to town painting your skins. And again, a real texture artist would go into Photoshop and create a good looking skin from a photograph. Let's change this view to textured view. Let's go back to face select on the texture. So I can press F on the keyboard, or I can change to UV face select on the object menu. And in the edit buttons, if I scroll over here, I can see a bunch of options here. Right now light is not selected, but I want light to be selected to make the faces collect light. Also I need to click this copy draw mode button to make all the faces respond to what I just did. So if I grab it, I can see the effect of it now. Control and up arrow if I have my mouse over one window and I want to maximize that window. And then I can press P on the keyboard. We've created a non-player character, Fish, in the game. The fish has an animation and a texture and basic movement, and it responds to light in the game world.